Good morning and welcome to the channel. This video is different from a lot of my content, but it is intuitive advice nonetheless, and it's something that I can speak of because I've been through this process 3 times. And if you stumbled across this video, you are getting advice from somebody who's not only been through this process 3 times, but most recently in 2020. So I'm providing you with, fairly up-to-date information. And what are we speaking about today? Well, if you obviously saw the title, but we're speaking about how to get hired as a professional firefighter. Throughout this video, I'm going to give you my insights of my experiences, advice that I was given from high-ranking members of professional fire departments, such as battalion chiefs and captains who are in charge of recruitment and professional development. In addition, I'll give you feedbacks from chiefs interviews that I got as well to give you some valuable insight into how to get hired as a professional fire department, because there is some variances depending on the type of department, but there's some basics everybody should know about the fire service as a whole before you decide to go down this route. And there's also some tips that you might be getting from people that mean well but are out of touch that in fact will hurt your chances and give the wrong impression to the people in the department that you're trying to impress. So first, if you're here, means you're considering testing to become a professional firefighter. Let's start with the basics. One, the era of firefighters just fighting fires are long gone, and I mean like 50 years gone. This isn't your grandfather's fire department. Firefighters do much more than fight fire. In fact, in most departments across the United States, EMS, emergency medical services, is 70% of the calls you're going to encounter. So it's very important to know. So if you're going to become a professional firefighter, you're going to become an EMT too. That is not a new thing. It's been that way for at least 20 years. I mean, it was required when I first tested right before the recession. That's why that didn't work out. But it's been required for a long time, and surely in every major city, all firefighters are EMT basics. It is what the profession is. The two are merged into one and the same, and many departments have paramedics riding on engines as well. The era of single role paramedics are coming to an end in a lot of jurisdictions now. So you're thinking about this profession. You don't know what to do, huh? Well, there's some basic things everybody should do when considering to becoming a professional firefighter. Number one, get in shape. I can't say that enough. Everyone will tell you that. You have to be in shape, because you may think, oh, I can make it through the CPAT, the Candidate Physical Ability Test, or some jurisdictions do their own. It's just called PAT, Physical Ability Test. Usually larger cities have their own that are more difficult than CPAT, like New York and Philly. But most medium jurisdictions, about like 400 or 500 uniformed firefighters per department, like where I got hired most recently 3 years ago in Arlington, Virginia, does the CPAT. That's pretty common and is the standard throughout the DMV. Know this about the CPAT. You have to be prepared for it. It may not seem that strenuous, but in the heat of the moment, there's no rest in between that. The number one thing that gets people in the CPAT is the stair mill. Yeah, because keep that in mind. It's like, oh, it doesn't look that difficult. Yeah, when you got a 50-pound pack and 20 extra pound weights on your shoulders, and the stress of my job is riding on this, it's a totally different thing. And know that CPAT is nothing compared to what you're going to endure daily when you're in the academy. So just because you made it through CPAT, or if CPAT was hard for you, then you better up your game as far as training, because otherwise life in the academy is going to be brutal for you and you may not make it. So that's an important point to understand. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, because before the physical ability test, first, if you want to be a professional firefighter, you have to apply, and you have to apply to departments that are hiring. Governmentjobs.com is one of the best resources for that. A lot of departments list on there, particularly medium and larger departments, like medium departments like Arlington County, Virginia, or large city departments like Washington, D.C. Some cities have their own internal system, because governmentjobs.com, you can select notifications for firefighter jobs in certain jurisdictions, certain states. Some big cities have their own notification system like that, such as Philadelphia. Other small departments, like small cities like Easton, PA, Reading, PA, you have to contact them directly. They don't advertise normally that they're testing. It's an internal thing, like just locally, because departments like that are hiring such few people at a time. They don't typically want more than 100 applicants, whereas City of Philadelphia will hire 300 firefighters at a time. They'll get 9,000 applicants. Places like Arlington, Virginia will hire around 20, get around 1,200 applicants. So yes, it is steep competition, but this video is going to help you if you listen to the end, set yourself apart, and give you tips that'll make you stand out from the average applicant. One, you have to meet the minimum requirements. The minimum requirements will be posted in the job advert to apply to be eligible to sit for the written exam. It's pretty self-explanatory. They're all pretty much the same. You get to the written exam. Written exams, typically, you need a 70% to pass. Now, there's also the point system, veterans preference points for those that have served in the military. Thank you for your service. You get 10 points added to your score. Know this, though. That 10 points you have to pass with a 70 of your own merit, and then 10 points will be added to your score. Those 10 points that you earned cannot be used to pass you. And there's also legacy points for those that are descendants of line of duty deaths. It works similar. Some jurisdictions give 2-3 points if you are already a resident of that jurisdiction. That varies place to place. There's some variances in points, but veterans preference points is the main one, and what they call legacy, which is the descendant of a line of duty death. So that'll be the first part. 70 to pass, and sometimes depending on how many people pass, they'll set that higher. When I tested in Easton in 2016, they set it at 80 because they were only hiring 2, and that knocked it down to 10 of us that just made it past the written exam, and there was 105 of us who took it. So it is steep competition, and people get chopped off pretty easily. I spoke about CPAT already. You can go on YouTube, watch a video exactly what CPAT is. Know if your department that you're testing for is doing CPAT or their own test. If they're doing their own test, become familiar with that. And unfortunately, a lot of departments who do their own test, unlike CPAT, they don't offer you practice sessions to go through the course. You go in, you get one shot, and you go in cold, which is quite stressful. So familiar yourself with that test as much as you can and try to recreate it on your own time. Try to recreate those motions, raising ladders. Make sure you know how to raise a ladder, how to swing a sledgehammer. Make sure you have at least handled the tools that you'll be using on, quote, game day in this test, that you have the best chance of performing that skill adequately in the allotted time. And usually for departments that run their own tests, there is very little room for error. If you take one misstep or you fall, there's most people who pass those pass with very little time left. They're designed that way to weed out candidates. So you make it past your physical ability test, be it CPAT or an internal one. The next likely step is the panel interview. A panel interview will usually consist of 3 to 5 members of that fire department, usually officers and perhaps a member of HR. You'll go through a variety of questions about why you want to be a firefighter, why are you choosing this agency. Know about the agency that you are testing for. Know the history of the agency. Know what appeals to you about that specific agency. I, for one, like to apply to very progressive agencies that remain on the cutting edge of both EMS and fire in terms of changes to the industry. Like Arlington was one of, at the time when I was there, one of 2 departments in the world that had portable ultrasound machines, the other one being the London Bureau of Fire. So that really interests me, as well as Arlington's very inclusive and progressive cultural nature. Because the fire service has changed and is still changing and will continue to change. The era of the hip boots and long coats and the good old boys club is either gone or on its way out in almost every jurisdiction, and rightfully so. So in your panel interview, know about the specifics of the department, how many stations, what specialty teams are you interested in? Like, do you want to come to this department because they have a technical rescue team or they have a hazmat team? These are the things you got to look into. Very small city departments won't have that, but you have to, if you're going for a smaller department, decide what about that particular area interests you. Don't just be like, well, you're hiring, which you're going to apply to every department in what you determine to be your range for driving. Mine was 4 hours because you're going to do it 10 times throughout the process at least. But you need to know about every department and be able to explain your background, what draws you to the fire service as a whole. Do you have any experience? That leads to my next point, experience. What kind of experience are they looking for in a firefighter recruit? It's a little trick here. One, have an EMS background. As I said, 70% of calls are EMS. So if you're already an EMT, or better yet, an EMT advanced, EMTI, whatever it's called in your jurisdiction, or a paramedic, that will set you apart from the pack. Also, related college courses. If you have, a degree or courses in fire science or emergency management or hazmat management, things of that nature, military service, of course. But the one thing that people think set them apart the most actually does it, and it can be a negative depending on, if you're going to go in strutting around with it, and that is volunteer firefighter experience. Most people that apply to become, career firefighters full time or not volunteer firefighters. And yes, this does make sense because most people who apply to career departments are people who grew up not necessarily in the area of that department, but grew up in areas that have fully career departments. If you're applying anywhere in the DMV, the greater DC area, that whole area, whether it's Prince George's County, Fairfax County, Arlington County, DC, Anne Arundel County, Annapolis, Maryland, they're all career departments. You have to drive like over an hour to get to where there's volunteers, and even then it would be combination stations, which are a combination of career and paid, as opposed to, fully volunteer department. It's not like people from very rural areas all filter into the city to become career firefighters, because most departments want, and some require, some don't, that their firefighters live within the jurisdiction where they work. Philadelphia does, for example. Philadelphia now requires you to live there for a year just to take the exam, which is why I couldn't test there the last time. Pittsburgh is the same, but that is more of a rarity. Most big cities require you to live there, usually within 6 months or a year after the first day that you draw pay. But the thing with being a volunteer, if you were a junior or something, that's equivalent to like a cadet program in a career department. But if you were a volunteer firefighter, don't act like you know everything, because I can tell you from experience, from multiple departments, from people I know, high-ranking training officers, they hate that. They hate, the person who, the way it was explained to me is, they said, how would an Army Ranger react to a reservist telling him that he's been through just as much and has done just as much as he had an active duty Army Ranger, and having a reservist lecture him on they're the same. Most volunteer firefighters are very professional, but there is a difference, and this isn't my words, this is from people that have been on both sides. There is a difference when something's your job versus your hobby. I'm not saying I don't consider volunteers professionals, but they're professionals, but they're part-time. It's the same as a active duty soldier and a reservist are both soldiers. One is full-time, one is part-time. There is a difference. How much is debatable, but the biggest reason I bring this up is because a lot of times people with volunteer experience act like they know everything. They get to an academy and they're like, well, no, I've always done it this way. They don't want to hear that. In a career department, you're all trained the same way. You're to be this homogenous team, interchangeable parts. They want everybody to do it their way. They're paying you to get trained. So they don't want to hear about, how you learned how to do it 3 years ago in some other state in a volunteer department. They'll say things like, well, if you're that important, that much of a big shot, then what are you doing here? They clearly need you back there. And my former captain said, he's not big on volunteers because he said it's easier to train somebody from scratch than to break bad habits. Not that all volunteer departments teach bad habits, but there seems to be more of that, unwillingness to change and this is the way we've always done it stuff in rural volunteer departments. And if you get to like a cutting edge urban department that's career, they don't want to hear that. Mention you have experience, if you've done it the same way they're doing it, if you're catching on really quick, great. Help mentor the other recruits that are struggling, but don't act like you're a know-all be-all. That will not end well for you. So, and that I've seen it multiple times. Take my word for it, or you don't have to listen to me. So yeah, be aware of that. But EMS experience will set you apart. College courses that are relevant, as I said, fire science, emergency management, that'll set you apart. Military service apart too. And also, um, make sure to mention if you have any like highly specialized training that could be relevant to the fire service, like scuba diving experience or hazmat experience, things of that nature. Arson investigation, if you were former law enforcement, because a lot of departments, their arson investigation fire marshals are within the fire department, even though they have investigative abilities, things like that. So those are key things that can set you apart. Do not act like you are entitled to get hired because you know somebody or you're related to somebody. Most places are, it's not like the old boys nepotism club anymore. And where it is, they got to hide that. You can't just be out in the open about that kind of stuff anymore because people complain, and rightfully so. Everybody should get a fair shot, but your fair shot to get hired should be based on your merit, not because somebody else, was a damn good firefighter 30 years ago. The line of duty deaths are a different thing. So you get past that. The next part, usually, and these steps can vary, the next part after your panel interview, they're going to do a very in-depth background check. If there's anything they're going to find, tell them up front. Be honest about it. Trust me, they're going to find it. And you'll be notified of what they find. After that, most, if not all at this point, are going to do a polygraph examination. Polygraph's simple. Be honest and don't change your story. All police have been doing it for years. It's relatively new for firefighters to have to go through it. After that, you're going to have a very in-depth medical exam where they're going to find anything that would preclude you from being able for service. Yeah, very in-depth. Just self-explanatory. They'll explain it when you're there. Uh, After that, usually the final step, and there can be some additional, there'll be a psychological test, very long. You're going to have thousands of questions of different multiple choice exams, and then the psychiatrist, usually a retired FBI profiler, at least if you're applying in the DC area, is going to go over a lot of things with you, your scores, your polygraph results, a lot of things, and he'll decide whether or not you're fit for service. And then finally, you're going to meet with the fire chief. This is really after that, because by the time you're meeting with the fire chief, you have what's called a conditional offer. And it's usually, I missed that. That usually comes when you only have medical and psych left. You usually get a conditional offer of employment, which means if you successfully make it through that and you have a good interview with the chief who gets the final say, then you're going to be in the next academy class. A little tip for a chief's interview: know about the chief's background. Look up the chief's LinkedIn. Know how long they've been with the department. Know, what degrees they have in fire science or emergency management. How many years they've been there. What station they were the commander of in their time. One of the best interviews I ever gave, unfortunately, the whole class was canceled due to budget cuts, was when I tested in Easton in 2016. I looked up everything about the fire chief at that time, and he was so impressed. And I knew about the history of that fire department and the different big calls and the line of duty deaths. He told me that, he's like, he'd been a chief for 9 years at that point, that it was the best interview he'd ever had. So that was a small department where there was no panel interview. There was just a chief's interview, but that department is like 50 people. That's not the norm. But in a bigger department, when you're meeting with the chief, know your chief's background, know the background and history of the department as much as you can. Know notable things about the department. Like when I was in Arlington, Arlington has the distinction of having hired the first female career firefighter back in the 70s. So important stuff like that you need to know. And then you'll know if you are, soon after the chief's interview, you'll know whether or not you're getting hired. Make sure, there's a lot of things to be sure of after that too. Most fire departments now have a no tobacco policy, so be aware of that and prepare for that. When you get to the academy, you are the lowest of the low. You are a recruit. I want to add that, however, you do have rights. Being a recruit does not mean that people with rank on you can tell you you must do anything or treat you in any way that you can't say no. That is bullying and hazing, and that is also something, while some will defend as traditional, it is also a relic of the days in hip boots and long coats. You will be explained in your early days in the academy how to follow a chain of command and report such inappropriate behavior, as you should and your integrity should demand. Being a firefighter is about integrity. It's about your personal integrity, your ability to work as a team, your ability to learn the skills and work as a firefighter EMT yourself. What it is not about is the continuation of somebody else's life. And what I mean by that is, just because your father was a good firefighter doesn't mean you, by example, are or should be given a free pass because he was. And the fire service is something that is always changing, always adapting, always expecting more of you, expecting more skills. Be aware of that. Do not sit there and be like, oh, I heard the stories of, what it used to be like in the 80s. Well, the 80s are gone. The 80s are gone in what is expected of a firefighter and what is the cultural norm of the fire service. The fire service today is a very inclusive environment. Keep in mind about this. We as people don't decide whether we're born male or female, gay or straight, white or black, Hispanic, Asian. You get the point. But everybody who's a firefighter decided that they wanted to be a firefighter. So you all have that in common, and you're all working towards the same common goal. And it shouldn't matter who comes from where, or who's related to who, or who has family in the department. I can't say it enough. The days of the good old boys club is over. Hip boots and long coats were retired in the early 90s. That's gone. It's never coming back. Somebody who is an immigrant, for example, who was a great student, great physical condition, great person to be around, should not be treated worse than somebody who's overweight and lazy, just because that, overweight and lazy person happens to be a third generation firefighter. Things like that are rightfully on their way out. But I'll finish with this. Getting hired and making it to the academy is just the beginning of your challenge. You have to make it through the academy, and you have to make it through your probationary period. As far as the academy goes, be prepared for anything, ask questions, be prepared for long days, be as in the best physical shape you can be in, and also have a good rapport with the men and women of your class that are now your brothers and sisters. You will form a close bond pretty quick with those people, because you're going to be spending most of your time together. In a lot of cases, you're going to be showering with each other too after PT. So get to know the people in your class, where they come from, why they're there. Get to know as much about your class as you can, because the bond that you make with the people in that class will be something special that nothing else will ever be like that. And people who served in the military can, basically tell the same thing about the people they went to basic training with. So I hope this video was informative, and it was, an upfront, real example of what it takes to get hired as a professional firefighter in this day and age from somebody who's gotten hired multiple times. If you have any questions about anything in this video, leave it in the comments below. I'll get back to you. I hope it was helpful. And please check out my other videos for, more informative content that is, factual and without any BS. Just, unbridled truth. So thank you for watching to the end, and best of luck in getting your badge.